Authentication and sessions are important for any mobile game. The authentication lets us know who a user is exactly, and a session is a period during which the user is authenticated to our system. So we need a way for users to be able to authenticate to the gaming server via email and password, or other providers like Apple and Google. We also need a way to check and verify that a session is still active while the user is playing the game. And we also need a way for users to be able to log out of the game when they're done playing. This step is very important because before we can do anything with any other component of Nakama, we must have an active session for the user. So I'm going to navigate to the server project, and I'm going to modify some things in the local.yaml. Remember, in the last video I explained that this is the file where you would want to add some configuration to your server, from things such as authentication to the server, the console, what level you want your logger to operate at, and then some more information that I'll explain here in a second. One of the things that we need to add, well, there's a couple of things, but the first thing is we want to be able to determine how long a user's session should actually last within the game. And I can do that by specifying a session property. And then the first property will be token expiry in seconds. And I'm going to set it to 3600 for 1 hour. And then the refresh token expiry in seconds, that's going to represent how long the refresh token will last. Refresh token expiry seconds. This one I want to be a little bit longer. I'm going to make it a full day. So I'll do 86,400 seconds. And then the next thing that we can specify for our configuration is authenticating via Apple. And you could do this for other third-party authenticators. But for my example, I'm just using Apple and Google, so I only need Apple for this example. Google, for some reason, doesn't need this step. I noticed I'm able to still authenticate without specifying this. I'm not sure why, but for Apple, if you don't add this to your configuration for your gaming server, you'll get an error saying that it's not able to connect or something along those lines. So I'll specify social Apple bundle ID, and I'll put the bundle ID of the app. All right, is everything right? Social Apple bundle ID, refresh token expiring seconds, token expiring seconds, session. All right, I think that's good. But there's only one way to validate. I'm gonna make sure that this can actually build. It looked like that built perfectly. So I'm gonna validate that by coming over to the local console, log in. And if I check the configuration, I can see that the app bundle ID has been updated to com example give grab. And then if I look for session refresh token, I have the time 86,400 and the session token 3,600. So this is good. I'm going to go ahead and push this up to production, and then we'll get started. Jumping back over to the client app, I'm going to first initialize some necessary Flutter packages for this part of the video. And let me see, all the Flutter packages that we'll be using for this one, I'll take this down just a little bit. We're going to be using Flutter Secure Storage for storing the session credentials, the token and the refresh token. The Equatable class for giving us an easier way to compare objects between one another. The Flutter login package is for using a login widget that comes pre-built already. GoRouter is for handling the routes that we'll be navigating throughout the app. Flutter block, of course, to use the block state management architecture. Sign in with Apple, that way we can use Apple sign in to authenticate our users. Settings UI to build a settings page a little bit cleaner and quicker. Google sign in to do the same thing as signing with Apple to sign users in via Google. Font Awesome Flutter to give us some extra icons for buttons and different widgets. Block Error Handler. This is a package I made myself and it's essentially just a wrapper for a block event that handles any errors that might occur, but I'll demonstrate more about that in a little bit. Modal util is another package I made as well. It just comes with some pre-built modals, snack bars, toast, an easier way to get started with an app without having to build all the UI alert type infrastructure. And then finally, Cupertino icons. I just threw that in there. I know it's necessary, but I just threw it in there last because not that important to me, but I know that it's important to Flutter. So we have that all downloaded. Now I need to go back into main.dart and take out this code because this isn't necessary anymore. We're not going to be authenticating via a device. We're going to authenticate via email, Google, or Apple. And we'll just make this underscore. Now, I need to make a repository that's going to be responsible for dealing with the session. So I'm going to create first an interface for what that session repository would look like. So I'm going to create a domain directory. And then within that, I'm going to create a repositories directory. And then within that, I can finally create the iSession repository.dart. All right, this is an interface, so we'll make an abstract class, iSession repository. Now the methods for this repository are going to be pretty much CRUD type operations, along with maybe some extras. But the first one is getting a stored session. So this first method is for us to actually get a session for a user. And it's going to be a type future, and it's returning a session, a nullable session, because we may not have a stored session. So we want to make sure that we make that nullable. The next method is saving a session. So once we've been authenticated, we then want to save the credentials of that user's session. Pass in the session right here. Okay. Then we want to be able to clear a session. Then we have a method for refreshing the session. So it's going to return a new session, a refreshed session, and refresh session. And we'll pass in a session. Oops. Refresh session. And the last method that we have is the logout session. So it's slightly different from the clear session because that's going to be just clearing out the tokens of the session. And then logout will be actually calling logout on the client, the Nakama client itself. Logout session. All right, perfect. Now that we have the interface for the session repository, it's time to create the session repository itself. So I'm going to go into the data directory, create a new folder called repositories, and then create the session repository. Okay, class session repository. And it's going to implement that interface, which is going to force us to get these overrides in here. And we'll just tackle these one by one. So the first one is related to clearing a session. And that means that we're going to essentially be erasing the values for the keys that are within the session. But first we need to add some properties. I'm not sure how I forgot that. We need to have a way to represent what the token is and the refresh token is just by a name or a tag, I guess you can call it. We'll just call this token key, and it will be Nakama token. And then we have refresh token key, which will be Nakama refresh token. Okay. Then we also need the Flutter secure storage package because we're going to be using a local storage for storing the token and refresh token. So final Flutter secure storage. And then we also need the client for interacting with Nakama. Nakama based client. Then I'll create a constructor to inject these in here. All right, now we have what we need. So I'm going to go back to clear session. And the first thing is it's going to need to be wrapped in a try catch block because there could be an error when it comes to deleting some of the keys from secure storage. So first, if there is an error, I'm just going to throw an exception, failed to clear token to tokens. And now we can work on the actual operation. I need to make this async though, because we're going to be awaiting the process of deleting a key. So we have the storage, and we'll just call delete, and then we'll specify what we want to delete on the storage, just like that. And this is asynchronous, so I'll await this, and then we'll do the same thing for the refresh token. Okay, so clear session is good. Don't think we need that. Now I'm going to go to get stored session. Now this one, maybe I should wrap it in try catch, but I'm not going to. But this is essentially just creating a session object by reading the values from local storage. And if we don't have any values, then we just return null. So it feels a little bit safer, but we'll get the token first. Let's make this async. Call storage, read, and the key will be token key, and do the same thing for the refresh token. Refresh token key, and then we'll just check to see if either of these are null. So if either of them are null, then we just return null. We don't really care. We're not really tripping like that. That just means we don't have a session for you. Now, if both of them have value, then we're going to recreate that session via the restore call. So this makes a whole new session based on the tokens that were saved in local storage. Next, we need to come down to logout session. I'm going to make this async as well. This is actually logging out of the server, I guess you could say. I'll wrap this in a try catch because this could get messy. And I'll throw an exception saying failed to log out session. And then the operation is we're going to call the client and then session logout, and we're going to pass in the session that we get. Next, I'm going to come down to refresh session. This one, like I said, is for actually calling session refresh on the client. So I wrap this in a try catch as well. You know what? I could probably just make this a little bit smoother. Make this async and fail to refresh session. And this one is going to be session refresh. And we don't return anything for refresh session. Actually, we do. That's not right. Let's see what's wrong here. Oh, of course. Man, with the typo that bad? Session refresh. Body might complete normally. Oh, that's right. We need to return. That's what I get for copy and pasting a method. Should have just typed it out. All right. And then we have save session right here. And all this is doing is saving the token and the refresh token to local storage. So we're just going to call await, make this async. Call storage.write, and for the token, we'll pass in the token on the session. And we'll do the same thing for the refresh token. Cool. We got the session repository mapped out. Now we can create the actual service that's going to be using this repository, and the session service will be used by the qubit and the block architecture. If I come back, if I come back over to the side and go within domain, I'm going to create a new folder called services. And the first service will be the session service .dart. All right, let's create this session service. Now, the first thing that I want to add here is I want to have a value that represents how long a token should last before, or what is the length of time that a token has to expire. And if it goes past that, then we need to check for reauthentication. So let's see, static const, we'll call it preemptive refresh duration, and it'll be 1 hour. And that goes along with how we have it set on the server. That token lasts for 1 hour. So after 1 hour, we're going to check some things to see, all right, it's time to reauthenticate. Then I'm going to create a method that is essentially a helper method, because it's going to help us connect the session service with our auth qubit. Now, the difference between the two is the session service is responsible for maintaining the session information, but the auth qubit is responsible for letting us know if we are currently authenticated to the app. They both work in tandem, because you need to know, you only know if you're authenticated if we have a session. But we also need a method for updating the authenticated state to log out when we don't have a session. Since they're in separate components, they're not going to do that by default. So we'll do that through this method, and I'll explain that later in the video. But I'll just call this on unauthenticated. Then I need the iSession repository, and then I'll inject that. All right, perfect. I'm going to come down below the session service and create the first method for saving a session. Future void save session. Oops. It's async, and we're just going to await on that session repository to save a session. Let's see here. Oops, that's not right. Session. Am I spelling it right? Oh, and import it. Okay. Cool. We got save session in there. Now we need a method for knowing should we refresh a session. And this is where we're going to use that preemptive refresh duration. So it's going to be a bool. It's either yes or no, but should refresh session, and we'll pass in a session. Now, the first sign that we do need to refresh is if the session is expired. Okay, but there's also another condition that we need to check for, is session has expired by this time. So we'll call date time dot now. Oops. Date time dot now, and add that preemptive refresh duration. So the time, whatever the time is right now, once this method is hit, add an hour to it. And if the session is past that, then that means we need to refresh. Then we'll come down and create the refresh session method. This is going to return a session, refresh session. Wrap this in a try catch. So we'll just clear the session and throw an exception saying failed to refresh session. And then within the operation, we'll get a new session from the session repository, refresh session. And then we're going to save that session because it's a new session that we've been updated with. So we'll save the session, and then we will return that new session as well. Under that, I'm going to map out the get session method, which is going to return a session, async, try catch. Same thing as before. We want to clear that session out. Really want to just do all that. Hopefully that doesn't come to bite me in a little bit. And I'm just going to rethrow it here instead. Just going to, whatever the error is, we're just going to let it continue up. But the operation for the try is, first we need to see if we can get a session from the repository. And we're going to check and see if the session is nullable. I mean, if it's null, because if the session is null, then that means we need to log out. We don't have a session, and we shouldn't continue. We shouldn't be doing anything dealing with the server when we don't have an active session. So we're going to call that unauthenticated method, which is going to be called in the auth qubit to now say we're not authenticated and the user will be logged out. And we'll also throw an exception here, no session stored. All right. Now, we also are going to check, should we refresh a session? Because if we should, then we're just going to use the result of that method from refresh session because it gives us a session back. Otherwise, if we don't have a null session and we don't need to refresh our session, then we can just return our session. All right, let me fix that. All right, I'm gonna scroll down. I'm going to add the method for logging out. Try catch again. All right, and the logout is, since it's a bool, either yes or no, we're not really going to deal with the error. We're just, hey, something went wrong. You're not in no more. False. Like it, I mean, not that you're not in no more. It didn't work. But let's say that it does work. Let's get the session first from the session repository. Then we'll check to see if that session does not equal null. Because if it does not equal null, then that means we have a session that we can log out of. And then regardless if the session is null or not, then we want to clear the session. Now this essentially wouldn't do anything for a null session, but I have it here just for safety, just as a final method to cross, clear out the tokens when you log out, and then return true. And then finally, I need to map the unauthenticated method to the callback that will be within the auth qubit. So create a method called set unauthenticated callback, which is a void method. Well, we'll be passing in a void function and call it callback. And all it's doing is mapping unauthenticated to that callback. Now we need to create the auth qubit that is responsible for maintaining the state of is the user authenticated or not. Now I'm using Mason. It's a tooling system that allows you to create templates based on whatever configuration you might need, and it saves a lot of time in preventing you from writing duplicate code. This one specifically that I use that I find very beneficial is creating blocks, the block, the event, the state, the UI to go with it, and then the barrel files to go along with it. It just creates the whole component on the fly based on the name, whether you want to be a block or a qubit, and then the style, whether you want to be basic or something else. So I'm going to be using that throughout the whole video, the whole series, and I'll demonstrate that right now, what that looks like. So I already have the Mason brick installed, so I need to first create the directory for the qubits, which will be within the presentation layer, and I'll call this qubits. And then I'll navigate into qubits, and I'm going to call Mason make Flutter block feature, which is the name of the block. The name is going to be auth because it's auth qubit. The type will be qubit, and the style will be basic. So it's making that qubit for me. And as you can see here, I have the auth qubit, auth state, auth page. There isn't going to be an auth page, so I'm just going to comment that out. But there will be a state and a qubit itself. The next thing that I need to modify is the auth state. This is, remember I had mentioned equatable is used for easier comparison between whatever you want to compare it with, whatever object that you're attaching it to. So for the auth state, we're going to make it extend equatable. And then we'll add the properties that will be on the state. Authenticated. We're going to have an is loading state to know when we're loading or not. And then a nullable string that will represent the error. So if we have an error, we'll have a value, a string. If we don't have an error, we won't have, it'll be null. And then I need a way to set these values within the constructor. Now, is authenticated will be false by default. Is loading will be false as well, because that won't actually start loading until a method is called. And then this .error will just be that value, because whether it's null or it has a value, it's going to be that. It's not asking for anything that it can't provide. Since it's nullable, it can be either one. I also need a copy with method for the auth state, because I want to be able to update one of the properties or multiple at the same time. But when you're dealing with block and qubits, all the states are immutable, which means they can't be changed. So you have to create a whole new one. But we'll use the copy with method to modify those properties and then assign it to a new auth state. So I'll call auth state, copy with. First we have a nullable bool object. Oops. And they'll all be nullable because we may not need to update every property. So bool authenticated, nullable bool for is loading, and then a nullable string for error. And we're going to return a new auth state. So authenticated is going to be the new authenticated if it's not null, but if it is, then we're going to use the current value that we have for authenticated on this current state. Same thing for is loading. Now is loading is slightly different because we only want to set it to true if it's true. If it's null or false, we don't need an in-between answer for is loading. We're either loading or we're not. So we'll set that to true if is loading is true. But if it's null or it's false, then we'll set it to false. And then finally, error is going to be just error. Okay. And we also need to override the props because we're extending the equatable class. So override props. These are the properties that will be used for comparison on the state. And it's just going to be authenticated, is loading, and error. Now I can go to the auth qubit and make some modifications here as well. I'm going to need to inject two services. I need the Nakama based client, and then I also need the session service that we created earlier. And then I'll inject those into the auth qubit. All right, now we have our dependencies. Now we can create the first method for logging in via email. Now the Flutter login package that I'm using is the login form, the widget that comes pre-built for login form essentially. And it requires, for whatever request that we're doing for authentication, we need to either return null or a string value. We return null if there is no error present, and we return a string value if there was an error. So just know that for login email, we will be returning a nullable string, and the same thing for authenticating via Google and Apple as well. Login email, pass in the email, and we also need the password. And we'll wrap this in a try catch. Now, since we have a error property on the state, when we do potentially receive an error, we can then just update the error property on the state with that error, e.toString. And then we'll also need to return e.toString. And then the operation itself, first we want to update the state to loading, because we're now loading now. We've just started a request. Oops. Is loading is true. And then I need to actually authenticate via email in order for us to receive a session object. So we can call client and then call the authenticate email method. I'm not sure why they put password first, but that is correct. We do need password. We also need the email. And then we also want to set the created flag to true. So this will create a new user. Then we also need to save the session. So we'll call save session on the session service. And then finally, since we've made it this far, that means we are now authenticated. So we need to update the authenticated property on the state to true. And then return null, because if there is an error, we return a string value. If there is no error, we return null. All right, next we have the login email out the way. Now I'm going to create the logout method while we're here. Call this logout. This will be async as well. Try catch as always. And this will just emit the state for an error. And for logout, we emit a new state of is loading, because we just started a new request. And we'll call the session service logout. If that goes through with no issue, we will set authenticated back to false. We've got the auth qubit out the way and auth state is good. So let's actually create the login page now. If I go over to pages, I'm going to create a new file and I will call this login page. It'll be a stateless widget, login page. And we're going to return first GG scaffold widget. It's essentially just scaffold, but it already has the background of like a snowy atmosphere in the background. And it has some other methods for making a simplistic scaffold page. But just to make sure that every page is in unison throughout the app, I just created it for that purpose. So using GG scaffold widget right here, the title will be login. Child will be the Flutter login widget. Okay. I don't like how this is on this line. There we go. I also want to specify that I don't want the user to be able to pop from this page, because it's the login page. You're either on it or you're not. There's nothing before you essentially. So if you're on the login page and then you try to go to something before you, it's not going to be good. But we have the Flutter login widget. Now the title on this will be gift grab. Then I'm also going to apply the GIF sprite asset for the login page, just for some style. So it'll be an image asset, globals gift asset dot image, and the theme will be login theme. We'll set the primary color blue accent, accent color's white. Okay, and then for on login, right now we'll just, since it's required, but we don't have it yet, we'll just have it return null. And on recover password, we can do that later. It's not super important. All right, now that we have the login page, I want to actually apply a method for actually logging in. So when this callback is selected, I want to actually log in. So I need to do that by creating a auth qubit and do my imports. And then the auth qubit here, I'm going to call login. the name, which is the email, and the password. All right, that looks good. And just for convenience, I'm going to add some extra properties to make my login flow a little bit smoother. I'm going to have a pre-made saved email that I don't have to type in every time, and a password as well. All right, and I'll apply that to the Flutter login. Saved email and saved password. With the login page out the way, I now need to apply some routing for the application, because we currently have 3 routes: the game page, the login page, and then the main page of the app. These are the pages that we will have, and I'm going to create an enum for these routes. So if I go into the data directory, I'll create a folder called enums, and a new file called go routes. So for go routes, it's an enum. We'll specify go routes, create the constructor, which is going to require a name, and that name is just going to be a string. And we'll have a route for the game. We'll have a route for logging in. And then we'll also have a route for the main page. Now I need to create the actual main page. The main menu page is going to be the view that the user sees once they log into the app. And then from there, they can decide to do other things, such as play the game, check the leaderboard, etc., etc. So I'm going to create the new main menu page. I'll select new file, main menu page.dart. This will be a stateless widget as well. Whoops, not stateful, stateless. Stateless widget, main menu page. Add the imports. And I'm going to follow more of a, block architecture when it comes to the page. So I'll have the page, but then I'll also have a view for it that will be used as the child of it. Main menu view. And this is simply just because within block, a lot of the times they use this main menu page for injecting the blocks that will be used for the view. So by the time you're down here, you don't have to worry about, do you have access to different blocks? You have everything you need by the time you reach this part. Down here, I'm going to return a GT scaffold widget, title GIF grab, can pop no, because you just got log out. That's the only way. We just can't pop back to the login screen. The user shouldn't be able to do that without, if they're not logging out. And then the child will be, just add some padding, edge insets, we'll give it 32. Then that child will be a flex grid view widget. This is another widget that I made. Essentially, it just takes in some pretty big buttons, and then is able to space them out in the proper columns and rows, just for easier dealing when it comes to multiple buttons for this page. So it's going to take in a list of menu button, not menu button theme, menu button widget. And that is yet another widget I made. Simply just a big button. It has text of what the title of the button is. And then it also shows, yes, a Lottie animation for that button. So I'll show you what that looks like in a little bit. Menu button is an enum, and we'll specify it for playing the game, because that's the only route we have right now is main menu, login page, and then the actual game. Then I'll modify the on tap. Once I tap that button, I want to actually go to another route, and that route is in my go routes dot game. Whoops. game.name. So this will navigate me to the game page when I press the button. Next, we need to actually build the app router that's going to be responsible for handling the navigation within the application. I will create a configuration directory and build app routes.dart. And we need to create a app router, which is going to return a Go router with all the configuration that we already need for handling, authenticating, and unauthenticating on the Auth qubit. So I'm going to create a Go router called app router. Build context, and it's going to return a Go router. And I need to import that. Okay, routes is required. I'm sure it is. All right, I need to specify first the initial location, and all of the initial locations need to be prefixed with the / because I guess it's the first part of the path, but it's going to be go routes login name. Then I also need to specify the redirect, and we're going to first see, are we authenticated? Because if we are, that means that we want to go to the main page. Let me create the Auth qubit up top. So then we can tell if we're authenticated by checking the state on the Auth qubit and then checking the authenticated property on the state. Now that we have that, we know that we need to go to the login page if we're not authenticated and the current match location does not contain login. If not is authenticated and state.matchLocation.contains login, then that's where we would return login. And really, I could just do this. I don't need to do that. There we go. We do have another situation that could happen if the user is authenticated, but they're on the login page. Redirect them to the main page. We can do that by checking if they are authenticated, is authenticated is true, and state.matchLocation does not equal login. Then we can return main. Oops. Otherwise, we'll just return null. All right, we also need a way to listen for changes on the Go router. That way, whenever the Auth qubit is modified, goes from authenticated to unauthenticated, we want to be notified of that. And we're going to create like a little helper method for that. We're going to create a streamable that will take care of that for us. I'm going to call this class Go router refresh stream. It's going to extend a change notifier. We're going to need the subscription of the auth state. And then I need to actually create the class with a stream of auth state. We initially want to call notify listeners as soon as this class is built, but then we also want to build the subscription by calling stream as broadcast stream dot listen. And we don't need the actual data itself. We just know that we have a new state, so we need to notify listeners that there's been a change. I think I did this wrong somewhere. Oh yeah, okay. There we go. And then of course, as we should with every dispose method, is there a way I can override that? Dispose. Okay, there we go. Then I just want to cancel the subscription because we no longer need it. Okay, now this right here is going to be what we're using for checking the updates to the auth qubit. And we do that by adding a refresh listenable to the Go router. And we'll just pass that in. And remember, we're listening to the stream, so we'll call the auth qubit and then pass in the stream. Now the Go router is completely tied to whatever state the auth qubit is going to make. Now we need to actually add the routes that are going to be on this Go router. So we'll create a new Go route. Need to import that. Okay. We have Go route. Let's first create the Go route for the login path. I'm going to copy and paste this. So that'll be the path. The name will be the same thing, just without the extra brackets. And why can I say this? Oh. Okay. We have path, name, and then builder is where we're going to return that login page. Okay. And we're going to do the same thing for the main route. And that's going to be the main menu page. And then we have the settings page. No, I'm sorry, not the settings page. We have the actual game itself, which is going to be a nested route on the main menu page, the main route, because that's the way the navigation stack goes. You have to go to the main page first, then to the game. So within this Go route, we'll add another Go route. If they're nested, they don't need the backward slash. So we just take this out, and this will be game. And it'll go to the gift grab game widget. I need to import. Oh, do I need import? Let's see. No, I need to add there we go. We'll just say debug print. This right here is just returning the score of the game, but it will just say, let's just say score. I don't know. Score. All right, there we go. So now all routes have been mapped properly. So now I need to come over to main.dart and actually add these instantiations of the session service as well as the auth qubit. So if I come to main.dart, I need to inject these services and the qubit. So I'm going to go to this layer right here, this main app page, my app page, I'm sorry. It's kind of the middle layer between main and then my app view, kind of like how I demonstrated earlier. Maybe it's not a block architecture thing. Maybe that's just how it should be. You have a page and a view that's a child of it. But my app page will be perfect for actually creating the providers that we need. So first level, I'm going to return a repository provider because we want to create the services first. So I'll return a multi-repository provider. Now with the multi-repository provider, we need to first add a repository provider, and it's going to be of type session service. And then we'll just create it via a context. And it's going to need a session repository. Whoops, is that right? Session repository needs to be injected as well. Whoops. Session repository, it needs a Flutter secure storage. And then it also needs a Nakama based client. I'll just return it. And then we'll just return that app view for right now, just to get these brackets back in order. That was getting kind of wild. All right, this looks much cleaner. So we have, let me add a const to this. So right now we're injecting the session service first. So that's good. And now we need to inject the auth qubit. And we do that by We could just return a block provider, but since we're already at the main level of the app and we're setting up a multi-repository provider, I think it's fitting to provide a multi-block provider as well. So we'll take this child again and we'll return a multi-block provider here. And then that child will be my app view. Okay, and first provider that we need is a block provider for the Auth qubit. Very similar process, created with a context. Actually, but I'm not going to create that way because we need to do some things before we return the qubit. First thing that we need to do is we need to create a session service at this level. And since it's been injected and we're at this point, we're good. We can access it. And then I'm going to create the actual Auth qubit with the get Nakama client and the session service. Oh, sorry, session service. And we'll return that Auth qubit right here for now. But remember, I mentioned that we need to be able to link the Auth qubit with the session service. So that way, when we realize we don't have a session, we then need to log out. Then we're going to do that right here with the session service, calling the set unauthenticated callback. And that callback is going to trigger the Auth qubit to log out. So now they're working in tandem perfectly. All right, I think everything on here is good. Last but not least, we need to come down to my app view and create the app router. So we'll call this final router equals app router, pass in a context. Actually, we need this in the build. Okay. And extend material app to now router. And we're going to remove the give grab game widget and instead add the route information parser. Router information parser. We need a route information provider. And we need a router delegate. That's all we need for the login page and pretty much the authentication flow. So let's try this out by running the app. So this is the login page. This is pretty much the form from Flutter login, but I have the form pre-populated with my email and password. And if I go to prod in production, I created a user for me already just to make the demonstration a little smoother. So I already have an account here. So now we're just going to make sure that I can authenticate and log in with this account information. So if I hit login, I've now been authenticated to the app and I'm now on the main page. And this is where I can go to play a game again. Now, if I refresh this, of course, I'm going to be logged out of the app again because right now, the only thing we have is logging in. We don't have a way to maintain that state of logging in though. But first, let's talk about adding a logout functionality. So when dealing with logout, we're going to handle this by creating a settings page that will have a possible option for logging out. So first thing I'm going to do is create a settings page. I'm going to come down here to pages, new file, settings page, .dart, stateless widget, settings page. We'll do the imports. And then I'll have the settings view with inside of it. Settings view. All right, perfect. And then within the settings view, I'm going to right now just return GG scaffold widget, and the title will be settings, and that child will be a container for right now. I'm going to create an instance of the Auth qubit because we're going to need that here shortly. All right, perfect. And then for the GG scaffold widget, I'm actually going to replace this container with a settings list, and this is coming from the settings UI package. Pretty much creates a an easier way to outline a settings page with sections, navigation, things like that. So if I type in settings list, there we go. And I need to first specify the sections that can be in here. And those sections could be anything from authentication, payments, profile, whatever it is, you name it. The first section will be a settings section of authentication. So we'll give it a title of authentication. And then for the tiles, the only tile right now will be a settings tile, navigation. That title will be logout. And we'll give it an icon, a leading icon of logging out. Oops. Icons, logout. I think I'm missing something. I need to import material. No, there it is. Icons, logout. Okay, and then we need to specify what happens when the user actually presses the logout button. And what we want to do is first prompt the user to ask them, is this really what you wanted to do? So we're going to display a modal from the modal util class, show confirmation, and the title will be logout, and then the message will say, are you sure? And the result from the modal can either be null, true, or false. So we only want to continue with the procedure if confirm equals true. If it's null or false, we don't want to do anything. So if confirm does not equal true, then we just return. Otherwise, we want to call the auth qubit and actually log out. And this is async as well, so we'll await that. All right, let me add some const modifiers to these. Perfect. So now we need a way to get to the settings page. So we're going to need to create a new route. So let's go to our Go routes and add a route for settings. All right. And then within the app router, whoops, I'm going to create a new route for settings that will lay within main. Settings, and it will go to the settings page. All right, now we just need a way to actually initiate the action of going to the settings page, and we'll do that by coming to the main menu page and creating some actions for the app bar. We'll create an icon button field tonal. When that is pressed, we'll call context push name go routes settings.name. And then we'll give an icon of settings. I think that's const. Okay. So let's see what this looks like now if we run the app. All right, so I'm here. I'll hit login for this user account, and I already have a account added for the trade.a.hope@gmail.com account. But as you can see here, we've logged in, and now I want to log out. So if I hit the settings button, it will take me to the settings screen where we see this logout button. It'll prompt me, do you want to log out? If I say no, nothing happens. But if I say yes, I'm then booted out of the app, and the auth qubit now updates its authenticated state to false. So logout's working good. The next task that we need to handle with authentication is we need to be able to check the current auth status of a user. And what I mean by this is currently when we log in, we have no way to represent that we've already been logged in or we've already been logged out. Every time we refresh the app, we will always go back to the login page. So we can create a method that will check the auth status at the start of the game. And we'll do this by adding a new method to the auth qubit. Let me cancel this, auth qubit. And we need to create a new method down here, similar to logout, future void check auth status, which is async. And I'll wrap this in a try catch as well. If there's an error, then we emit the error. But if not, then we will continue with the normal flow. First, update the loading state. Is loading is set to true. Then I need to get a session. Session service, get session. And then I'm going to see if it needs to be refreshed. Should refresh session. If so, we wait for the refresh to happen. Otherwise, we emit a state of true for the authenticated value on the auth state. State.copy with authenticated set to true. And this means that everything went smooth and the user is currently authenticated. Now all we need to do is go to main.dart, and within here, within the creation of the auth qubit, actually, we can call check auth status right here. Perfect. So when that qubit is created, we automatically check the status to make sure that we're good. Can't wait, but we'll be good. All right, let's see what this looks like when we are actually in the app. Okay, on the login page, let's log in. All right, now if we refresh the app, we should be sent back to the app just like this. Now if we log out and then refresh, we should still be logged out. Perfect. So check auth status is working as expected. The next task at hand is allowing users the ability to sign up. Right now, they're only able to log in, but that's kind of pointless if they can't create an account. So I'm going to go back to the auth qubit, and we're going to create another method for signing up. Now, something I noticed, actually, was it here? Great false. Oh no, we're good. Okay. So come down here and we'll create a new method that will return a nullable string, because similar to the login method, we need a nullable string to represent if an error occurred or not. We'll call this method sign up. We'll need a string email, string password, and string username, async, and wrap this in a try catch. And if there's an error, we emit that error. e.toString will be applied to the error on the auth state, and then we return that error. But if everything's good, then let's start first by updating our is loading state to true, and then we need to get a session, and we do that by authenticating via email. But the difference is, well, first let's pass in the password. Email will be email, username will be username, and then create will be true. Now, something to keep in mind, I had made this change in between demonstration, but I originally had create set to true, but this should actually be false, because when we're logging in, we're not creating an account. We're only creating an account for the sign up. So keep that in mind. They're both calling authenticate email, but only one creates an account, the other one doesn't. So once we have the session, we need to save that session, of course, and then emit a new state with authenticated as true, and then return null for the error. Now let's go back to the login page, and we need to add some additional fields to the Flutter login that will prompt the user for more information. So right now it's just email and password, but we're going to ask it for a username as well. And we'll do that by modifying the additional sign up fields property. So within here, we'll add a user form field, and we need to specify a key to represent which piece of sign up information do you need additional. So I'll go back up top and create that right now. This is just going to act as a key to let us know which additional sign up data do we need. So we'll call this username field that just says username, and we'll use the key here, and then we'll also give it an icon's face, and this can all be const. Perfect. Now with this, I'm going to create an additional smaller helper method that will let us know if the name, the password, or the additional sign up data is null. So we have a nullable string here. We'll call this get form error sign up data. And this is just going to check if data.name, which is the email, equals null, or data.password equals null, or data.additional sign up data equals null. If so, return a string saying email, password, and username cannot be null. Otherwise, we return null because there was no error. So we'll go back up to the Flutter login widget, add the on sign up property. Oops. And first thing we're going to do is see if we have an error on our form based on the sign up data that we have. If we have an error, return that error. But if we don't, we simply want to call the auth qubit to sign up. And we'll pass in data.name, data.password, and data.additional user data for that key. And then there's one more little tidbit that you can do with the Flutter login widget, and that's create a terms of service. So I'll open this, and we can create our own term of service, give it an ID, make it mandatory, and this one will just say, I understand that I will never score higher than Trey codes. And since it's mandatory, you can't even play the game until you admit this one fact. So I'll just keep this in here. Let's see what signing up looks like on the app now. I'm going to change this email by adding a 1 here so that it's technically a new account. And then we'll hit sign up, same password, and we have our term of service here. We can't sign up until we agree. But once we do, we can then hit sign up. Then it will prompt us for a username. I'm just going to go with Mozzie just because that's what I've been listening to today. Hit submit. And now we have created a new account with the username Mozzie. So if we go back to the production server, we'll see that we have this account for Mozzie, okay? For email trey.a.hope1@gmail.com. The next task that we need to handle with authentication is allowing users to log in via Google. So far, they've been able to log in and sign up with email, but we're going to extend some of those options by using third-party authentication options such as Google, Facebook, Apple, etc. For this demonstration, it'll only be Google and Apple, but you get the picture. So first, I'm going to create an interface for a repository that will be responsible for handling the authentication for Google and Apple. So I'm going to come back to repositories, create an interface for the social auth repository.dart, abstract class social auth repository, and we'll add the only method in there for right now, which is a method to get the Google token. Now we need to actually create the repository that's going to be implementing this interface. So if I go to repositories, create a social auth repository .dart, and this class will implement the social auth repository. This will force us to create our override, and now we can get started with setting up the get Google token method. So first thing, as always, I'm going to wrap this in a try catch, but this catch will be a little different because we'll be catching for a Google sign-in exception error. Let's make this async. Now, the cool thing about the Google sign-in exception is it gives us an actual code of what could have potentially went wrong with the authentication flow. So we can actually iterate over those potential cases. So all these are things that could go wrong when authenticating with Google: unknown error, canceled, interrupted, etc., etc. Now there's one in particular that we want to modify and not be labeled as an error, and that's if the user canceled, because if they cancel the authentication flow, an error didn't necessarily occur. They just decided last minute that they didn't want to continue with the authentication. So we need to make sure that this isn't treated as an error and instead just return null. So I'm going to put this at the bottom and we'll say return null. Oops. Everything else is an actual error, so we'll just rethrow and then remove all these clauses to make them fall into each other. So we have the errors handled. Now let's work on the procedure. We're going to need a Google sign-in account, and we get that from the Google sign-in object instance authenticate. Let's specify the scope hint, which will be email, and then we need to specify a URL, https www.googleapis.com/auth/contacts.read-only. Now, if we're able to get the Google sign-in account, we just want to return the ID token on that Google sign-in account. So return Google sign-in account authentication ID token. Perfect. We have the method for get Google token. Now we need to create a service that will be responsible for calling this method. Social auth service .dart social auth service, and we're going to need a social auth repository, and then we'll inject that. And now we can come down here and work on the method for calling the get Google token. Future nullable string get Google token, which is async. Wrap this in a try catch as well. And this one, we'll just throw an exception saying Google authentication failed. But if it doesn't fail, we're going to await the social auth repository to get that Google token for us. Now, since this is a new service that we're working with, we're going to need to inject that into our block. So we'll go to main.dart, and back up here, we'll create a new repository provider of type social auth service, and we will create one from a context and pass in a social auth repository. Now we also need to be able to identify when a user has canceled versus actually experiencing an error. And we need to create an enum for that called login error exclusions. Login error exclusions. This is just an enum that's going to let us know if we get a specific string value back that says XYZ, then we know that this is not an error and instead we should take a different action. So first, this will just be a enum with an ID. Let's create the constructor. And then finally have maybe the only case that we have, but we'll just say it's the first one for now. Canceled. Canceled. Now let's go back to the auth qubit, and we need to inject our social auth service, just how we did the session service. Social auth service, inject it. Just like this, and then we'll pass that in. Perfect. And let me delete that. Now, within the auth qubit, we need to create a method for logging in with Google. So this will be pretty similar to login email. So I'm just going to copy and paste this. Hopefully this doesn't bite me later. This will be called login Google. It doesn't need email or password though. We will be emitting that first state as true. However, we need to first get the ID token, and we do that from our social auth service that we just created. If the ID token is null, that means that they've canceled the process. Then we're going to emit the state again with no properties, basically turning off the is loading flag. So now we're back to the first initial state. And then we're going to want to return the login error exclusion for canceled. So we know exactly if we get canceled back, we know that the ID token was null, which means that they canceled the process. There wasn't an error that occurred. From there, I'm going to get a session from the client.authenticate Google, and pass in that ID token. Okay, everything else is the same. We get the session, we save it, and then we emit the new state with authentication set to true, authenticated set to true. Otherwise, yeah, everything else is the same. That's good. So now if we go to the login page, I always do that, I don't know why. Go to the login page. We're going to add a new login provider. And there's an array here, so you can add multiple. But the first one that we're going to add is the login provider for authenticating via Google. So the callback will be an async function that simply calls that auth qubit to log in via Google. And then we can specify an icon. I'm going to use Font Awesome for this actually. I like their Google icon. Font Awesome icons Google. Oops. There we go. Font Awesome icons Google. The label will be Google as well. And then the errors to exclude from error message, that will be an array. And we're going to pass in the login error exclusions for canceled. So this is basically saying if we get a value back if we get a string value back that says canceled, we're going to exclude this exclude this from the list of error messages. Basically, don't do anything. Go back to your regularly scheduled program. Okay. Let's see what this looks like. I'm logged in, so I'm going to log out, and we can now see we have this new lovely provider here for logging in with Google. So I'm going to select this. A new window will prompt up asking or letting me know that it wants to use google.com to sign in. I'll then, some scopes were invalid. Okay, that's good. Oh, we got a typo. Go APIs. That's not what we want. So I'm going to come back here, check out that auth, the social service, get Google token. Actually, this isn't it. iSocial. Where was this at? Get Google token. Okay. Google APIs. I think that's correct. Let me refresh this now. See if we can log in with Google now. All right, good. Now we can select an account. So I'll select this one, hit continue. And now I've been authenticated to the app. If we go to the production server, we can see that we have a new account for Trey Hope, or the one that was authenticated via Google. And last but not least, we need a way to authenticate via Apple. Now this is going to be very, very similar to authenticating via Google. So a lot of it will be copy and paste, but there are some slight differences. So let's get into that. First, I'm going to open up the iSocial Auth repository again, create a new method for this time getting the Apple token, which will cause us to now update our social auth repository. We'll create that override, wrap this in a try catch. For this one, we're going to use sign in with Apple exception. Now this one's slightly different from the Google errors because there is no enum for iterating over potential outcomes. There is no properties on the sign in with Apple exception. However, the exception does tell us what error occurred in text format. So we can do some extra work to see if that error contains the word canceled. So first I'm going to come into the error clause and check and see if e.toString, toString contains the word canceled. If it does, we know that we have canceled and an error did not occur. Similar to Google Auth, we'll just return null for the canceled. Otherwise, we rethrow the error. Now, if everything's good, let's get a credential. Credential from sign in with Apple .get Apple ID credential. Then we need to specify the scopes. And those are going to be Apple ID authorization scopes email and Apple ID authorization scopes for full name. Now, if we're able to get that credential, then we're just going to return the identity token on that credential. Now let's go to the social auth service, and pretty much the same thing as get Google token, but this one will be get Apple token, and it's going to get the Apple token, and if it fails, we'll say Apple authentication failed. Perfect. Now let's go back to the auth qubit. Same thing with login Google. I'm going to copy and paste this, and we're going to have a method for logging in with Apple. Authenticate, I'm going to get Apple token, authenticate Apple. Yeah, so these methods are pretty much mirror images of one another, except I'm just calling different methods for getting the Apple token and then authenticating with the Apple token. Now I can go back to the login page and create another login provider, but I'm only going to display this login provider if I'm on an iOS device or a Mac OS device. And I can do that by calling platform. Let's import that. Platform.isIOS or platform.isMacOS will display this login provider for Apple. And let's change this information for it, and we'll call login Apple. All right, let's see what this looks like for logging in with Apple. Let me log out, and we should have a new provider here for Apple. So I'm going to select this. It's going to prompt me to enter my Touch ID. And we have an error error finding or creating a user account. And this is related to the fact that there's already a user account with the same email that's on my Apple ID. There's already an email in the database with that. If we go back to the server in production, we have someone has an email for trade.a.hope, this one. So the issue is it can't create that the Apple account because that email is already taken. So in order to do this, I'll just delete this user specifically, and then I'll try again, and we should be able to authenticate now. All right, I've been authenticated via Apple, and I can verify this by checking the new account. What time is it? 9:31. That user was here. And if I check authentication, it has an Apple ID attached to it. Now, something to keep in mind is when you authenticate via Apple, it then assigns a email property for you as well, right here. But when you authenticate via Google, it only gives you a Google ID. You notice that I didn't have an email signed for the Google ID. Even though I used the same email, trade.a.hope@gmail.com, an email was not assigned. So keep that in mind, because technically if I authenticate via Apple and they assign the trade.a.hope@gmail.com, and then later someone wants to sign up with that email, they can't because it's already been taken. But this is the only issue with Apple. But this is a good sign, because this means that we are now able to authenticate to our app via email and password, Google or Apple authentication.